The flickering neon sign of Pete's Diner cast a tired, reddish glow onto the rain-slicked street, each drop reflecting a distorted starburst of light. Inside, the air hung thick with the comforting scent of frying onions and stale coffee, a familiar perfume that had clung to Thomas, the lone waiter, for the better part of 2 decades. His movements were a practiced, weary ballet, each plate set down, each order taken, a silent testament to a life lived on the fringes of the American dream. He was a man of quiet dignity, his dark skin a canvas etched with the lines of hard work and unspoken kindness, his eyes holding a depth that few bothered to plumb. Tonight, however, the usual humdrum rhythm of the diner was subtly off-key. The storm outside had dwindled the usual late-night crowd to a sparse handful of regulars, leaving the clatter of cutlery and the sizzle from the open kitchen unusually prominent. Thomas was wiping down the counter, the rhythmic squeak of his cloth a counterpoint to the distant rumble of thunder, when the bell above the door chimed, a brittle sound that cut through the diner's comfortable drone. 2 figures stood silhouetted against the dim streetlights, small and huddled, water dripping from their thin, threadbare clothes. They were children, a boy and a girl, no older than 7 or 8. Their eyes, wide and luminous in their dirt-smudged faces, scanned the almost empty diner with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Thomas paused, his hand still on the counter, his gaze softening. He knew that look. He had seen it in his own reflection many years ago. The boy, slightly taller and more defiant, clutched the girl's hand. His clothes, though ill-fitting, had once been a respectable plaid shirt and denim jeans, now mud-streaked and torn. The girl, in a faded pink dress that was several sizes too big, looked even more fragile, her hair matted against her head. They seemed to radiate an aura of utter vulnerability, a stark contrast to the rough-and-tumble street they had just emerged from. Thomas watched them, his heart a familiar ache in his chest. He knew the drill. It was a cold night, and the rain was relentless. He knew the kind of hunger that gnawed at young bellies, the kind that made every step a painful effort. He knew the kind of fear that made you look over your shoulder, even when there was nothing there. He gestured toward the booth in the corner, near the window, the one where the glass was always slightly steamed. "Come on in, kids. It's too cold to be standing out there." His voice was a low, comforting rumble like the distant thunder, but softer, gentler. The children hesitated, their eyes still wary, like 2 small, cornered animals. The boy finally nodded, a barely perceptible dip of his head, and tugged his sister forward. They slid into the booth, their movements stiff, as if in use of the simple luxury of a soft seat. Thomas approached their table, not with the usual order pad and pen, but with a warm, damp cloth. "You too are soaked," he said, his voice laced with concern. He offered the cloth to the boy. "Wipe yourselves off. You'll catch your death." The boy took the cloth, his small fingers surprisingly delicate as he gently wiped his sister's face, then his own. The girl watched Thomas with an almost heartbreaking intensity, her eyes never leaving his face. "Are you hungry?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. It was written in the hollows of their cheeks, the way their eyes seemed to drink in the steam rising from a nearby customer's coffee. The boy nodded again, a little more confidently this time. "We haven't eaten in a while," he mumbled, his voice a dry rasp. Thomas didn't press for details. He didn't need to. The story was etched on their faces, in the weary slump of their small shoulders. He knew. He had lived it. "All right then," he said, a small, kind smile touching the corners of his lips. "What do you two like? Burgers? Fries? Maybe some pancakes?" He rattled off the diner's limited menu, his tone light, as if he were discussing the weather. The children looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. Then the boy, ever protector, spoke. "Anything," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Anything is fine." Thomas nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. He walked back to the kitchen, the swinging door creaking shut behind him. Old Man Pete, the diner's gruff, perpetually grumpy owner, was hunched over the grill, flipping burgers with practiced flick of his wrist. He was a man made of sharp angles and even sharper words, his face a permanent scowl. "Thomas, you planning on serving those 2 street urchins?" Pete grumbled, not even looking up. His voice was a gravelly rasp, like stones tumbling down a hill. Thomas didn't flinch. He had known Pete's bark for years, knew that beneath the gruff exterior, there was a kernel of something, even if it was buried deep. "They're just hungry, Pete," Thomas replied, his voice calm, even. "They're just kids." Kids without a dime, more like, Pete retorted, slamming a plate onto the counter with a clatter. "This ain't a charity, Thomas. You know the rules." Thomas knew the rules. He also knew something else. He knew the gnawing ache of hunger. He knew the cold bite of the night. He knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be dismissed. He looked at Pete, his gaze steady, unwavering. "I'll pay for it," he said, his voice low but firm. "Out of my own pocket." Pete finally looked up, his eyes narrowed, scrutinizing Thomas. He saw the quiet determination, the deep-seated compassion that had always been a part of his best waiter. A long moment of silence hung in the air, broken only by the sizzling of the grill. Then, with a grunt, Pete turned back to his cooking. "Fine," he grumbled, his voice still rough, but with a hint of something unidentifiable beneath it. "But don't make a habit of it." Thomas offered a small, grateful nod. He knew Pete wasn't happy, but he also knew Pete wouldn't stand in his way. He returned to the children's table, a genuine smile on his face this time. "All right, kids," he announced, his voice a little lighter. "2 burgers, extra fries, and milkshakes. On the house." The children's eyes widened, first in surprise, then in unadulterated joy. The girl, who had been so silent, let out a tiny gasp, a sound that pierced Thomas's heart with its innocence. As Thomas placed the steaming plates before them, their eyes shone with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. They ate with a controlled urgency, not quite ravenous, but with profound appreciation for every bite. Thomas watched them, a quiet satisfaction spreading through him. He refilled their milkshakes, offered them extra ketchup, and even managed to coax a few shy smiles from the girl. He didn't ask where they came from or where they were going. He just offered them a moment of warmth, of safety, of kindness. When they were finished, full and content, a quiet calm settled over them. The boy looked up at Thomas, his eyes, previously filled with desperate hunger, now held a different kind of intensity. "Thank you," he said, his voice stronger, clearer than before. "Thank you for everything." The girl, mirroring her brother, also mumbled her thanks, her small hand reaching out to gently touch Thomas's arm. It was a fleeting gesture, but it conveyed a universal gratitude. Thomas simply smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes. "You too stay safe out there," he said, his voice soft. "And remember, always be kind." He watched them leave, their small figures disappearing back into the rain-swept night, a silent prayer forming in his heart for their safety, for their future. He knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that he had done the right thing. It wasn't about the money. It was about something far more valuable. It was about humanity. 20 years later, the neon sign of Pete's Diner still flickered, though now it was a little dimmer, a little more worn. Thomas was still there, a steady, comforting presence amidst the ever-changing tides of the city. He was older now, his hair flecked with silver, his movements a little slower, but his eyes still held that same deep well of kindness. Old Man Pete had passed on a few years prior, leaving the diner to his equally gruff, but slightly less cantankerous nephew, Junior. Junior, a man in his late 40s with a perpetually furrowed brow, ran the diner with an efficiency that bordered on coldness, more concerned with the bottom line than the human heart. It was a bustling Friday lunchtime, the diner filled with the usual cacophony of hungry patrons, clattering dishes and shouted orders. Thomas was deftly navigating the narrow aisles, balancing plates with a practiced grace, when the sudden, unmistakable thrum of a helicopter sliced through the air, shaking the very foundations of the diner. Conversations faltered, forks paused midair, and heads turned toward the sound. The roar grew louder, closer, until it seemed to be directly overhead. Then, through the front window, a massive, sleek black helicopter descended from the sky, a gleaming behemoth of advanced technology, its blades a blur against the overcast sky. It settled gently in the street directly in front of Pete's Diner, dwarfing the surrounding cars and buildings. The rotor wash whipped up a storm of leaves and debris, sending patrons scrambling away from the windows. A hush fell over the diner, a collective gasp of disbelief. Such a sight was unheard of in this working-class neighborhood, a place where the most exciting arrival was usually a new delivery truck. The side door of the helicopter slid open with a whisper hydraulics, and a figure emerged. He was a man of commanding presence, impeccably dressed in a sharp, dark suit, his posture radiating an aura of quiet power. His face was mature, handsome, etched with the subtle lines of experience, but there was something familiar about his eyes, a flicker of recognition that stirred forgotten memory in Thomas's mind. Behind him, a young woman, equally elegant in a sophisticated dress, followed. She carried herself with an understated grace, her eyes bright and intelligent. The man surveyed the diner, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the customers, until it landed on Thomas, who stood frozen by the counter, a coffee pot still in his hand. A slow, gentle smile spread across the man's face, transforming his otherwise serious demeanor. He began to walk towards the diner, his stride purposeful, the young woman by his side. Inside, the silence was deafening, broken only by the distant whir of the helicopter's cooling rotors. Junior, who had been behind the counter, looking as bewildered as everyone else, finally found his voice. "Can I help you?" he stammered, his usual gruffness replaced by an uncharacteristic nervousness. He had never seen anyone like this in Pete's diner. The man ignored Junior, his eyes still fixed on Thomas. He stopped directly in front of Thomas, his height imposing but not threatening. "Thomas?" he asked, his voice deep, resonant, and unmistakably familiar. Thomas stared at him, a tremor of recognition running through him. The face was older, refined, but the eyes, those eyes, he had seen them before. "Yes." Thomas managed to respond, his voice a little hoarse. The man's smile widened. "Do you remember me?" he asked, a hint of genuine warmth in his tone. 20 years ago, a cold, rainy night, my sister and I were a little lost. A memory, long buried beneath the everyday grind of diner life, slowly began to surface in Thomas's mind. The two small figures huddled against the rain, the desperate hope in their eyes, the plates of burgers and fries, the milkshakes, a warm spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. "The two kids," he whispered, a gasp escaping his lips. "The two orphans." The man nodded, his gaze tender. "Yes, Thomas, that was us. My name is David. And this," he gestured to the woman beside him, "is my sister, Sarah." Sarah stepped forward, her smile as gentle and sincere as her brother's. "We never forgot you, Thomas," she said, her voice soft, filled with genuine emotion. "Not a single day." The diner, which had been silent, now erupted in a murmur of whispers. Junior, his mouth agape, looked from the impeccably dressed siblings to Thomas, then back again, his mind struggling to comprehend the scene unfolding before him. He had dismissed Thomas's quiet act of kindness for years as mere sentimentality, a waste of time and resources. Now, standing here, he felt a prickle of unease, a dawning realization that he had profoundly underestimated the man who had worked for his family for decades. David extended a hand to Thomas. Thomas, still in a state of bewildered joy, took it. David's grip was firm, confident. "Thomas," David began, his voice taking on a more serious, yet still deeply grateful tone. 20 years ago, you didn't just feed us. You gave us hope. You showed us kindness when no one else would. You treated us with dignity when we had none. That night, you changed the trajectory of our lives." He paused, letting his words sink in. "After that night, a local charity found us, and we were placed in a foster home. It wasn't easy, but we worked hard. We never forgot your words, Thomas. Always be kind." He smiled. "I went on to study engineering, and Sarah, she pursued a career in law. Together, we founded a company, a technology firm that started small, but thanks to a lot of hard work and a little bit of luck, it's grown exponentially. We've always wanted to find you, to thank you properly." David then stepped back slightly, his hand sweeping toward the outside. "That helicopter out there? It's ours. We came to take you on a journey, Thomas, a journey of thanks. We want to offer you something in return for the kindness you showed us. Junior, unable to contain himself any longer, stepped forward, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Wait a minute," he blurted out. You're the David Thompson? The tech billionaire?" David turned to Junior, his expression cool, politely dismissive. "I am indeed David Thompson," he confirmed, his gaze returning to Thomas. "But right now, I'm just a boy you fed, Thomas." Junior, visibly deflating, retreated a step, his mind reeling. He had spent years treating Thomas with barely concealed disdain, viewing him as little more than a cog in the diner's machinery. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. David then pulled out a sleek, leather-bound folder. He opened it, revealing several documents. "Thomas," he said, his voice brimming with a quiet triumph, "we've been looking into your situation. We know you've worked tirelessly here for decades. We know you've always put others first. And we know that this diner, Pete's Diner, holds a special place in your heart, despite everything." He paused, a significant look passing between him and Sarah. "So, my sister and I have decided to do something about it. We've purchased Pete's Diner, the entire building, the business, everything. And we want to give it to you, Thomas, as a gift, a testament to the power of kindness." A stunned silence enveloped the diner. Customers gasped, their eyes wide with disbelief. Thomas, for the first time in his long stoic life, felt tears welling in his eyes. He looked from David to Sarah, then back to the folder in David's hand. "You bought the diner?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "For me?" Sarah stepped forward, her hand gently touching Thomas's arm. "It's the least we could do, Thomas. You gave us a start. Now we want to give you yours. No more long hours, no more gruff bosses. This diner, your diner, will be a place where kindness is always on the menu." Junior, his face pale, tried to interject. But my uncle left it to me. "You can't just—" David cut him off, his voice firm, unwavering. "Junior, your uncle's was clear. He left you the diner. Yes, but he also left it open for sale if the right offer came along. And our offer, I assure you, was very, very right. The paperwork is all in order. As of this morning, the diner is officially Thomas's." He held out a key, gleaming silver, to Thomas. "Your new keys, Thomas, to your new life." Thomas took the key, his hand trembling slightly. It felt heavy, substantial, a symbol of a future he had never dared to dream of. He looked around the diner, the familiar worn booths, the chipped counter, the flickering neon sign that had once seemed a symbol of his endless toil. Now it was all his, a legacy built not on ambition or wealth, but on a simple act of profound generosity. David continued, his voice echoing through the silent diner. "And that's not all, Thomas. We also want to establish a foundation in your name, a charity dedicated to helping disadvantaged children, just like we were. We want your legacy of kindness to continue, to inspire others to make a difference, one meal, one act of compassion at a time." He then looked out at the assembled patrons, his gaze encompassing everyone in the diner. We often hear stories of grand gestures, of powerful people making their mark on the world. But sometimes the most profound impact comes from the quiet heroes, the unsung individuals who, with a simple act of kindness, change lives forever. Thomas here is one of those heroes. A ripple of applause started, tentative at first, then growing in strength, until the entire diner was filled with the sound of appreciative claps and cheers. Junior, standing at the edge of the crowd, looked down at his shoes, the weight of his own actions pressing down on him. He had always seen the world in terms of profit and loss, never understanding the immeasurable value of a human connection, of empathy. Thomas, his eyes brimming with tears of joy and gratitude, finally found his voice, a husky whisper that carried surprising strength. "Thank you," he said, looking at David and Sarah, his gaze filled with a lifetime of unspoken emotions. "Thank you for remembering. Thank you for everything." David smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that showed he understood the depth of Thomas's emotion. "You taught us that kindness is never wasted, Thomas, and that sometimes The greatest treasures are not found in vaults, but in the generosity of the human spirit. As Thomas, with David and Sarah by his side, stepped out of the diner, the flashing lights of news cameras greeted them. Reporters, drawn by the spectacle of the helicopter, scrambled for interviews, their microphones thrust forward. But Thomas, the humble waiter, remained grounded, his gaze calm and steady. He had no grand speeches to make, no platitudes to offer. His story, his life, spoke for itself. The helicopter, its powerful blades beginning to turn, waited for them. Thomas, still holding the key, looked back at the diner, a new light in his eyes. It was no longer just Pete's diner. It was his diner, a beacon of hope and kindness in a world that often forgot the power of a simple, generous act. As he ascended into the sleek black machine, leaving behind the grimy streets and the flickering neon sign, he carried with him not just a memory of two hungry children, but a profound realization that true wealth lies not in what you accumulate, but in what you give. This story, like so many others hidden in the fabric of our everyday lives, reminds us that the seeds of compassion, planted quietly and without expectation, can grow into towering trees of justice and redemption. It's a powerful testament to the idea that true power doesn't always reside in titles or wealth, but often in the unassuming heart of an underestimated individual. When kindness is met with privilege, the outcome can be a transformation that redefines what's possible, proving that a single act of generosity can echo through decades, creating a ripple effect of profound change. This is a story of truth against privilege, of the quiet dignity of one man reshaping the world for two others, only to find his own world beautifully and powerfully transformed in return. If this story resonated with you, if it sparked a flicker of hope or a renewed belief in the power of human connection, then join us on our journey. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that unveil the hidden power of the human spirit, where emotional justice triumphs, and where the quiet heroes finally receive their well-deserved recognition.